October 30th. This is the Metro Council Public Health and Safety Committee special called meeting on domestic violence in Davidson County. First of all, we do have an agenda that's published on the Nashville.gov website. But I'd like to welcome everybody in the room for attending. We have excellent attendance from a number of distinguished elected officials, and I really appreciate everybody being here. In the interest of time, I'll recognize you as we go through, as opposed to doing recognitions at the beginning. We also have Vice Mayor Henderson and Amanda Deaton-Moyer from Finance up here, in addition to Margaret Darby and Hannah Zeitlin representing Metro Council. So what we're going to be doing today is basically we're going to be kind of summarizing our month. And we've had, I think, from a committee perspective, a really productive month. It's been a combination of a tremendous amount of education because, as everybody in this room knows, the council doesn't spend a lot of time really talking about processes related to the courts. You know, usually we will see some of you at the end of kind of the budget process when we're talking about, you know, what the chair's substitute budget is going to look like. And one of the things that I think we really have come to learn, especially those of us who are second termers, is we can't wait until May or June to be really talking about important issues that may have budget implications. And so today's conversation is really more about process and questions and things that we have learned throughout this month, as opposed to talking about people or individual cases or anything like that. So really our focus is going to be on some of the process information that we've learned. It's been a very informative time. I have learned a lot. I know my peers who've been able to attend our first special called meeting on the 16th, and then our special called meeting on the 23rd, where we actually got to go and do some court watching, which was very educational, and I really appreciate the warm welcome from court officers and everybody in the courthouse as we were navigating our way as a group around to be able to observe in different courtrooms. In particular, Judge Escobar, who specifically stopped and asked if we had questions along the way, which was very helpful. And then ultimately, we learned a lot really related to the Office of Family Safety, in particular, not only how they operate and how they are a national leader of family safety centers, but also, you know, just some of the simulation activity that we had. We did the In Her Shoes activity on the 23rd and learned quite a bit, kind of thinking through, you know, what it's like to be kind of on one side of the judicial system. So wanted to mention all those things. But in addition to some of the personal learning that we have all had, we've also been able to recognize and see in action, you know, some of the great specialization, you know, that our system has in place, you know, in particular, police specialization, the prosecutors, the judges, and then ultimately, we also know, you know, one of the great things that came out as during the course of this month is, you know, that the General Sessions Court's been awarded a grant, and hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about that grant from Judge Walker and her involvement with that. But kind of to give some context around the backstory about why we're here, is as we were going through and we were changing, kind of going from our first year to our second year, we started hearing some more cases on the news. And of course, a lot of times that's what council members, we tend to find out, you know, about some issues through excellent reporting in Nashville. And so we heard about some cases. Some of them were very high profile and covered by various news channels. And of course, that got several of us very interested in kind of these issues. And so as a result, because I have limited relationships on the judicial end, you know, I went to Diane Lance because Diane has been to the Public Health and Safety Committee in the past. She has taken us on tours of the facility, talked about her needs with the Office of Family Safety. And so she was able to provide, you know, a lot of background information, I think, that gave us some really good context about some of the issues and the questions that I had about what we were seeing on the news. And so just to kind of give you an idea, I guess, as far as grouping some of the questions or things that have been like collectively on our mind, we're going to hear from you all about suggestions that you all have kind of related to what you think could be improvements around our processes and like the handling of domestic violence cases. But also, you know, some of the things that we saw when we were court watching, you know, related to The language access, that has been a hot topic, with council members in the past for various challenges that our city has had. And of course, we have a very diverse community. And so we're interested in hearing more about language access, interested in bond conditions and kind of how that information is shared across each of the stakeholder groups related to our processes. I'm really interested in kind of the access to criminal records. And I know that that has been something that has had some very specific news stories shared about it with Judge Todd about setting bond and, the challenges that you all face when it comes to making informed bond decisions. And so those are some of the things that are kind of coming to mind as we get started. So at the very beginning, though, we're going to go through each of the stakeholders kind of in order of really where you are in the process. And so I've invited MNPD to be our first person or first representative to come up, to Captain Giles, to come and speak on behalf of MNPD today. And what we're going to be doing, we will take questions along the way, but at the same time, we'll also come back at the very end, kind of ask more questions. And if there's anybody that has or if we ask you a question that you can't answer, feel free to correct us because I understand that there's sensitivity around to that. But also if you're representing a department where maybe you do not have the full authority to speak on behalf of the department related to a question that we may ask you, feel free to just say that I can't answer that. We'll take the question, we'll carry it back. So just wanted to kind of set the stage on that as well. So Captain Giles, I welcome you to the podium to kind of share your perspective about, first of all, what you do, the context that you work in, and any improvements that you see from a policing perspective.
Thank you, Councilman Evans, for having the MNPD represented here, and Vice Mayor, and everyone, the department heads. Briefly, Captain Blake Giles, I currently am assigned to the Family Intervention Program. The police department has counselors and advocates that work very closely with the interpersonal crimes branch in the police department, including domestic violence. My office is also located in the Office of Family Safety. We work hand in hand with the Family Safety Center as well. I spent time in the Domestic Violence Division as a sergeant and lieutenant, and I've worked alongside ADA lead Christina Johnson, sat in many conferences with her. Most recently, I was in a meeting with Judge Escobar and Judge Walker, as well as Magistrate Lead Glanton, regarding GPS laws and protocols and how we would address that, as well as updating our lethality assessment protocol and how we screen high-risk individuals when we respond to calls out into the field. So I feel as though I'm very much invested in this, and I appreciate Chief Green being here as well. Captain Pete Deshay is currently over the Domestic Violence Division, and I'm here because he was unable to be here. With that being said, just a brief overview to those of you that may not be familiar with our division. We currently have 21 detectives assigned to our division. We have 5 supervisors, sergeants, 2 lieutenants, a captain, 2 professional support staff, and a number of part-time employees. Currently, last report year to date, we have a little over 20,000, almost 21,000 total domestic cases that our officers have responded to and reported, and each one of those cases comes through our office. So that's quite a bit, and particularly with intimate partner, of those, over 7,000 were criminal in nature. So of those 21,000, we'll say domestic related incident reports, not all of those will be criminal. Some of those may be questions about evictions or divorce, etc. But those that are criminal in nature, our detectives are assigned to review. With that being said, organizational excellence, precision policing, and community engagement are 3 pillars of the police department. Organizational excellence, I would point out within the last year, our senior detective, Jared Esther, he attended a training in Phoenix with ADA Christina Johnson in regards to what could the police department do better to assist ADAs. We thought that was very beneficial. Detective Esther was able to come back and create a unified training division protocol for our domestic violence division so that new detectives are getting trained by the senior officer in best practices that we found throughout the country and through all the various wonderful trainings of the Office of Family Safety Center. So we're attempting to always incorporate best practices. With respect to precision policing, our office engages in warrant initiatives quite often and to seek out those most high-risk offenders that we know are wanted for domestic-related offenses. We, at one point, had an ATF federal task force officer assigned to our division who's now a sergeant in our office. So he has a number of contacts, and that's been beneficial in our efforts to locate DV offenders. And then with respect to community engagement, our division engages in a number of educational outreach efforts. We have spoken on teen dating, for example, in McGavock High School in Stratford. We would love to continue to do that. For those of you that are affiliated with the schools, if you could share that word for us. We've also taught in cosmetology and beauty schools. We've located with community colleges to do reality-based trainings, and we teach Tennessee Highway Patrol and other agencies as well. So we're always actively involved in the community. From a patrol response, the Domestic Violence Division is quite lengthy, but that's intentional. And officers know to approach every situation with the utmost respect of the individuals involved. An acronym that we routinely use that I'll share with you all that may or may not resonate, COPS, C-O-P-S. It's a real easy way to remember what it is that we are required to do by law and policy. That is counseling, orders of protection, prosecution, and shelter. And so on each domestic call, officers are required to do that. In addition, officers are checking for orders of protection, bond violations, and now GPS monitoring statuses, as well as completing the strangulation screening 117, our lethality assessment. This paperwork adds up, and the effort that goes in it to analyze it can be intensive. And because of that, we also participate in domestic abuse death review teams. That's called DART, suspicious death review panels. We also weekly and monthly do the high risk panel where we review those reports. And with that being said, the report that was provided initially, I think on the 16th, the court issues informational brief, page 8, the prosecution of IPV crimes, and we look at, the comparisons and some of the numbers. It's no secret to anyone here that the population of Nashville has drastically increased in the last 10 years. And with that, you have more folks, and understandably, domestic violence is unfortunately one of those issues that we can't, I say we, the police department, we can't necessarily treat that issue the same way we do others, in that I use this example quite often. The EDU initiative downtown with officers on each corner and blue lights and the uptick, that's been wonderful for our department. But we can't put officers in residences and we can't put them in homes. So we are constantly looking at innovative ways to get our message out. I provided to some of the council and to Councilmember Evans a pamphlet that we often provide just to provide additional information, but we truly believe in education and empowerment. And so moving forward, there's a few issues for the department that I would like to raise. Primarily, I know we're discussing victim safety and offender accountability. So with respect to victim safety, with those numbers that I read off, the thousands and thousands of cases, ideally, we need to strengthen, to increase our cases in regards to helping the ADA. The ADA do a tremendous job in attempting to review body-worn cameras and jail calls and all of the in-depth investigation that goes into it. I wish that our detectives had the time to more finely comb that. That's not a default to the men and women in the division or our department. They work so fiercely, and I'm so very proud of them. But these can be very complex cases, particularly with respect to vulnerable adult and high risk. If our department was afforded additional personnel that could actually do the deep digging on some of these cases, it would greatly assist in expanding our high-risk panel, for example, to more in-depthly look at these cases that we know these victims are very susceptible to violence. That being said, additionally, part-time employees would be a big benefit in that the experience of retired investigators can pay dividends. It has paid dividends in other offices and divisions within our department, but it would also be a great help to our division. And with that, offender accountability, what happens in the follow-up? The family intervention program works very close with the domestic violence division to ensure that we provide direction to those victims. I'm not here to speak on the FIP, but with respect to the domestic violence division, our officers are showing up to court and they are supporting those victims, and they are required by policy to send letters, do home visits, call multiple times, and attempt to arrange meetings to assist them. The police department certainly wants these offenders to be held accountable. The statistics show that these individuals that are back out are unfortunately committing additional crimes, and domestic violence is cyclical in nature, and oftentimes it starts with a very simple incident that then escalates to a greater incident, and then so on and so forth, and it's very difficult for these offenders to leave. That being said, we greatly appreciate all the support of the council. We greatly appreciate fully funding the police department for personnel and potentially expanding our division resources so that we can assist the ADA in making stronger cases, and some of those workloads are not as vast for the detectives that we have. I know that's a lot in a little bit of time, so.
Thank you for that. I've got a couple questions, but I'm going to recognize Councilmember Weiner first. Councilmember Weiner, you're recognized.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everybody else for being here as well. We really, really appreciate it. So relating to what you've said about your needs, and obviously I'm going to ask the same question to everybody, so get prepared. I want to know if I could wave a magic wand. What is it that the Metro Council can do to help? So this is certainly informative. Because we're not in the operational day-to-day of what you're living, to tell us that, yes, we need more personnel and we need them to do these things. One thing that I think would be especially helpful is, as a follow-up, maybe let us know how many you need. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be helpful to us in terms of, as we approach budget season. I think that would be something that would be especially helpful.
Could I make that request at this moment?
Absolutely. We'll take it.
So ideally, we would expand by 6 or 7 detectives. And what that would allow us to do is increase our high-risk unit. And then part-time employees, they work 19 hours, and that's about 42,000, which, doing the math, they could supplement for the cost of having to train officers, et cetera. But a combination of both would be great.
Thank you for that. That's helpful, and we'll probably come up with more questions as time goes on. I was interested, too, in the personnel to do the digging. That needs to be an investigator, but do they need additional clerical support? And then the second question that I would have in relation to this would, these officers that are having to go out and do their daily duties and then still have to do all this follow-up phone calls, letters, make sure that, the folks that are in their charge are being managed. How do they have the time to do this, and what would it take to help make that more efficient, more effective?
Certainly, great question. So with respect to the clerical prowess, if we were to bring back part-time employees that were, say, former investigators that have the knowledge and know-how of what they're looking for and have that experience digging through records and obtaining that information, that would be beneficial. With respect to the officers following up, the process is that the initial call for service goes out, officers will respond to that location. Then and there, those officers will provide all the assistance that they can via that COPS acronym. And then those cases get routed to the Domestic Violence Division for additional follow-up. And correct.
They're not having to do it all alone. That helps. I'll stop asking questions right now, Chair, and we can.
Okay, I'll come back to my little list I have running here. So when you were talking about the size of the Domestic Violence Division, like how many detectives do you have today? And have you grown over time? Are you stagnant? Like, give us some context kind of around that.
The current staffing we're at has been at that level prior to this report dating back to 2013.
Okay.
So as the population has grown, that staffing number has stayed the same, but you can see the challenge in that.
Okay, thank you. And then when you were talking about the kind of digging in and kind of the, basically not having maybe the bandwidth I'll use to describe that, to be able to get into kind of that information and scrutinize it more closely. I mean, do you feel from a strengthening your case perspective, is there information that's being missed, or is there information that's just not being kind of bubbling to the top because you're not being able to have as comprehensive maybe a review?
I think it's the latter, in that our officers, when they respond to these scenes, they're taking photographs. Of course, they have their body-worn cameras. They're seizing any weapons involved. They're reviewing surveillance video if it's available, talking to witnesses. What we found in the last several years is that with domestic violence, particularly with the uptick in social media, for example, you have individuals that are stalking their victims through online platforms and such that, how many of us have been stuck just scrolling in our phone before we lose track of time? But that information takes time to dig up. But that can be so pivotal in court because it can show patterns and show intent and things like that. So that's an example of how they could help do that digging per se.
I see. And then I guess I wanted to kind of go back a little bit in time in your career and help me understand, like, when you're a patrol officer, like, and you're in the field, would you know that there's bond conditions? I guess, how would you find that information out as part of your process?
Sure. When we would look into our database, the clerk's office would have entered if, in fact, that individual was out on bond, or if there was an order of protection. We can see stuff like that through our NCIC, and then we would contact either the sheriff's office to verify that an OP is in effect, or the bond office to, in fact, recognize, yes, these bonds are still in effect. And now, with respect to the GPS monitoring, those companies are calling our dispatch directly, as well as sending an email to our office, and then they are actually providing updated pings on the location of those individuals wearing those monitors.
Okay. And then, if you were in a position where you're needing to arrest somebody because of a bond condition, how, I guess, thinking about from a alleged victim perspective, how do they know to call the police? Is that something you're communicating to them? Do you give them a pamphlet or something, like, whenever you're discussing kind of next steps with them in those situations?
Going back, two parts of that question, going back to the COPS acronym, with the orders of protection and the shelter and the counseling, we always encourage victims to ensure that they're, speaking with the victim witness coordinators, et cetera, so that they're knowing, when is court. And there's a form that we provide to the sheriff's office. It's a national form, but we have our own through the state, the SAVIN program. It's provided to the sheriff's office so that when a domestic violence offender is released, or they change, their facility that they're housed in, et cetera, that victim is notified. So the victim's getting updates, or should be.
Okay, and then as far as the education side, on the COPS acronym, the counseling, I guess, that you're giving to, the person, is the Office of Family Safety, I would assume that that information is probably included as part of what you're sharing.
We can actually use that office to help victims obtain orders of protection and seek other services, absolutely. The lethality assessment, I'm sure most of you have seen that over the last few meetings. That triggers a call to the YWCA. We're so very blessed in Nashville to have certain resources. And so by reaching out to them directly, that can put them in contact with someone then and there to speak with until they can set in motion a plan to further, seek counseling or other resources. So.
Okay, thank you for that information. It looks like Councilmember Nash has a question, so hang on one second, because I'm always disoriented because it says Robert Nash and not Bob. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There's been some discussion in our meetings about night commissioners not having all the information they necessarily need to set what we might think are more appropriate binds. And one of those things was the NCIC printout. Right now, all they know is what kind of arrest record we have from Davidson County. And you'd mentioned that officers can check NCIC. And is there some way that can be provided to the commissioner by the police officer as they come before the night court commissioner?
I don't want to speak on what they can and can't see, but from our standpoint of the police department, we're able to contact our records office, and then they can reach out to those other jurisdictions pending something is flagged in NCIC. In terms of the bond conditions for the commissioners, we are currently in the process of updating that lethality assessment so that the answers to those questions that screen those most high-risk individuals is presented to the magistrate, and that'll give them a more well-rounded understanding of the circumstances and the seriousness of it. As far as the magistrates or the night court commissioners being able to see, someone's entire domestic violence history, locally they should be, and or if we tell them, particularly if it's a case that our office has followed up on, we may be able to track down more of that information, which goes back to that digging. But I don't want to speak on if they can see that or not. I'm not overly familiar with what they all see.
I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to say, here's another example of, I tell it every day. These officers are so articulate and so well informed. I'm always proud when one of our Metro officers stands up and makes a presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Nash. Let me get Councilmember Benton real quick, and then we'll come back to Councilmember Weiner.
Just as a follow-up to what we were just talking about, that's a real concern of mine, is to try to get the NCIC information available to that night court commissioner so that they can make a better informed decision about bail and something, lethality assessment immediately. So that, I guess we're getting more protection for the victim in a case like that. Because we get that outside our inside parameter information to add to what we already know locally. So, and I realize you don't know the exact answer to that right now, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm just asking for a follow-up, if you would, for us. And maybe just check in with either the council office or our chair, and just try to find out how early we can get this information for NCIC data to our commissioner on the first touch so that nothing slips through the cracks. That's my concern. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Benton, Councilmember Weiner.
So is there anyone in this room that can answer the question that has done the research on this? That's what I thought. When it's your turn, would you please address that with us? Thank you. I think that'll help.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Weiner. Any other questions for Captain Giles? Okay, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. If you're able to stick around, I'm sure we'll have other questions that you may want to weigh in on. Thank you. Next, we'd love to have General Funk and ADA Johnson come down and share with us, kind of from your vantage point, what's your take on everything, and, where do you feel like our opportunities are for improvement?
Great. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And thank you all for taking this issue so seriously. This is still 50% of the violent crime in Nashville is domestic violence or domestic violence related. Our office has 70 assistant district attorneys and about 90 support staff, but 10 of those assistant district attorneys do nothing but domestic violence. 8 of our 21 victim witness coordinators do nothing but domestic violence. We also have a 3-person prosecution support unit that helps and assists the assistant district attorneys and the police as far as making sure people can come to court and filling in any gaps. So obviously, this is by far the largest unit within our office, and we treat this as the front porch to our office because we take violent crime so seriously. We are very fortunate to have great lawyers in this division, and Christina Johnson is one of Nashville's greatest resources. So I appreciate her being here tonight and all of her work every day. I come tonight with 3 suggestions on ways that we can improve, and one piece of good news as far as a new program that we have implemented. And then I'm not going to step on Judge Walker's good news, but she and the General Sessions judges have made a tremendous change that I can't wait for y'all to hear about because it makes a huge difference. So anyway, so number one, as the district attorney, what I believe and what our office believes is that domestic violence should actually be considered a health crisis. Police officers now have mental health professionals that go out on a number of mental health calls. I would love to see domestic violence professionals and advocates go out with police officers to domestic violence calls. Our police department does an amazing job. The body cams confirm it. Body cams show that police officers are asking every victim on every scene all of the right questions. Oftentimes they get accurate information, but not always, because there is sometimes a reluctance on people's part already by the time the police get there to be completely candid. If an advocate was present, then they could address issues and get information that just having a police officer on scene, that barrier alone might be something that where we would not get complete information. And those advocates could do things that would not be necessarily in the police officer's job description with ways to properly surround with services and connect with the Office of Family Safety. Essentially, those advocates would be able to, I know y'all did the In Her Shoes simulation, but that advocate would be designed to be able to walk with her in her shoes as she begins the process of the criminal court system, but also, more importantly, begins the process of reclaiming her own dignity and autonomy. We do not think that those should necessarily be under the umbrella of the district attorney's office because it could cause some concerns about us being somehow coercing a witness from the very jump. It would also present other types of staffing issues for us, no matter how generous the council was. I don't know if that should be a lay employee within the police department. I don't know if that should be an employee of the Office of Family Safety. My thought, because I understand that y'all would like specifics, at least 1 per precinct, so 8 at this point, would let us get a gauge for whether or not we need more going in the future. But I do think that if we had a domestic violence professional / advocate with the police on DV calls, we would see tremendous improvements in victim support, and that would also lead to more successful prosecutions. And obviously drive down the recidivism rate if people are getting that level of support instantly at the initial point of contact. Second of all is firearm dispossession. This is something that we as a city have been talking about in circles for years. Somebody gets convicted of domestic violence. If they possess a gun, they have to dispossess the gun, but there's no real mechanism to check whether or not they actually dispossessed the gun, or if they dispossessed it very temporarily but then got it back. The Travis Reinking case with the Waffle House shooting, that person had been dispossessed, but then his parents gave him a gun back later, and then he came to Nashville and did that mass shooting. That's a real hole. We've got it in the law, but then there's no way to enforce it. I had a meeting with Diane Lance, Becky Bullard. I had Assistant District Attorney Kate Melby with me. We met in July. We had a Zoom call with a member of the District Attorney's office in Denver who was a former police officer, and his only job in their office was to go out and dispossess people of their firearms. In talking with him, while that was at least a slight improvement for the city of Denver, his total numbers that I believe he said was around 30 firearms per year he would dispossess. And when he would dispossess them, the procedure would be he would identify a place where he wanted to go where he believed there was a gun, and he would then contact the Denver Police Department or one of their local municipalities' police departments, and then they would go out there together. So it required a certain collaboration with the local precincts and the local police officers. If we were to just put somebody in the DA's office and all we got was 20 or 30 guns a year, I'm not sure that is as productive as we would like for it to be, though it would be a step forward. But it also requires kind of interjurisdictional, what are we doing? What's the police department doing? I am reluctant to say that our office is the proper place to put someone whose main job description is firearm dispossession, but we definitely need one as a city. If we just gave an extra police officer or two, or the extra police officers to the DV unit, I don't know that they would designate those people to this particular issue with all the issues that we've got going on in Nashville. If we want to make sure that this firearm disposition is done, then I think that would properly be placed with the Office of Family Safety, though I understand that Ms. Lance is reluctant to have them there, but they're kind of co-located with the police out at the Family Safety Center anyway. But I don't want to speak for her, and I'm not going to speak for her. I'm just saying that if we had the funding for a position or positions that could do this, it would make a difference. But for a variety of reasons, I think all of the stakeholders perceive that it would be better handled by one of the other stakeholders. If it absolutely has to be us, we will do our best. But I don't think we would be as effective as the other stakeholders. But I also understand something's got to be done, and sometimes if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. So I will look for guidance from the council and from the other stakeholders, but I really strongly believe that the proper place for that is either the police department or OFS. Now, the third thing is a potential legislative change, and Christina Johnson's going to talk about that.
Hi.
Hi.
So, as I'm sure at this point everybody's well aware, domestic violence in Tennessee is defined quite broadly, right? And one of those relationships within the statute are adults or minors who live together or have lived together. This is the roommates. I have seen in practice a disproportionate adverse effect on our migrant population due to this. When police officers go out on a domestic violence call, they do not have the right to not press charges. They are mandated to make an arrest. So when a neighbor calls on several men who live together and there's a loud argument and somebody throws a beer bottle at somebody's direction, the police show up and they tell the truth, what happened, and say, I don't want to press charges. Unfortunately, the officers say, it's domestic, I have to, right? The adverse effects that we see are a mandatory 12-hour hold. It's charged as a domestic assault, which carries a very negative connotation, not only in society, but also with ICE. These people who have been here, and had they been, just friends who were financially able to live independently, would not have had this problem. They would have said, oh, it was a fight and we don't want to press charges, and everybody would have gone away, right? And so this is one that, was put into the law for whatever reasons in Tennessee, to encompass anybody who was living together that was not in an intimate relationship. But I feel like at this point in time, Nashville is a very welcoming place to everyone who decides to live together. And it is a condition that I would strongly encourage us to push our legislators to remove from the statute.
And so assault would stay a crime, but it would not be included under domestic assault. And
There wouldn't be mandatory arrest, and there wouldn't be a mandatory holds. There
how
wouldn't
much
be
of your time?
mandatory GPS tracking. It would not clog up our dockets. So we could focus on the power and control dynamics in the intimate partner domestic violence relationship.
how much of your time is eaten up by some of those cases?
I mean, a substantial amount of time.
And I believe we had one case just this week where an assistant DA was tied up in that case for over 2 hours, when she could have been doing interpersonal, intimate partner case, or a generational case where somebody beat up their parent or their parent beat up somebody who was a young adult. So that is significant. I know the council cannot do anything, but if you direct the city's lobbyist at the legislature and propose legislation just to remove that one qualifier out of the statute, that would free up so much with regards to the resources that we could then place on the intimate partners and the generational violence.
Let me ask you a quick question, I guess, about that. And I've got a couple, and you may have more comments, but I guess I'll just interject specifically to that. Is MNPD required to prosecute everybody under that state law? Could there be a policy change on MNPD side where that would provide more flexibility, or no?
I would defer to the police on their policy. I am unaware, but as in practice, I have not seen, I've seen a requirement to make an arrest.
Okay.
Right, and if it came to the domestic violence dockets, we could amend the charge to simple assault and then send those over to the regular general sessions courts. But once they're already in and they've met with us on our early intervention meetings, and we've already spent some time and a district attorney already knows the facts, then, once we've already gone the first 4 or 5 steps, we kind of need to go the last 4 or 5
And
steps.
I'm just going to jump in here and say, by that time, it's too late. The harm's already been done. This person has been detained for 12 hours. Immigration knows that they're here, and we see them get deported. We do. And it's a tragedy.
Right, so you don't just see it in the immigrant population, but the immigrant population is overrepresented in those roommate violence cases for any number of reasons. Now, before we're done, though, I want Christina to share some really great news as far as a great program that we've gotten started in conjunction with the YWCA.
All right.
We've also seen domestic violence abusers getting really accustomed to how the system works and using the judicial system to continue to abuse their victim in a number of ways. I've been working with the National Association of Prosecutors and then started a program in June in conjunction with the YWCA, where we are identifying defendants who are survivors of domestic violence, who maybe they fought back at the wrong time, or their abuser was the first one to call the police. And we're diverting them from the criminal justice system and instead getting them supportive services with the YWCA. Since June, we have about 40 people that we've deferred their cases to the YWCA. So this is something that is happening here in Davidson County, and something, again, that when police don't have discretion on these domestic violence cases, I mean, I frequently see, sometimes they're the ones that they're making me aware of the situation, saying, I've been out to this house 5 times and he's always the abuser. And this time I really didn't want to make the arrest, but he had a scratch on his face and I had to. And I hear that frequently. And so that's kind of what stirred it up, kind of in my spirit, for lack of a better word, to start this project. And we're hoping that there's continued success. And I'm sure that the Y, if they have an opportunity to talk, will probably be asking for some resources.
All right, so this was a program that was initially conceived in Seattle. The American Prosecutors Association has partnered with us and with Portland, Oregon, to be the next 2 cities that could adopt this model. Because of how fantastic our YWCA is with Sharon Robeson, with Daphne, with the Weaver Center, and because of the amount of resources that we have in this unit of our office, we have greatly outpaced Portland. And in fact, we're probably going to, my goal is that we'll actually be the gold standard, not Seattle, within the next couple of years. But the work that Christina and the YWCA have been able to do is fantastic. To be able to be here 4 months after launch, and I've already had 40 people diverted into this program, getting the services. We're going to be tracking to make sure there's no recidivism, but getting the services and being able to get jobs, be safe, be healthy, it's breathtaking. So I wanted to close our talk with a piece of good news about some progress that we're doing here in Nashville.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we like good news. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you both for all of your work on this issue. And I guess a couple questions that I had, and I know Councilmember Weiner had her hand raised, so we'll go to her next. On the, when you were talking about kind of like the designated mental health side, or, public health crisis side kind of this work, when you're thinking about like, the idea of advocates, with MNPD, kind of like how we currently have the Partners in Care model, with mental health co-op. Has there been kind of a deeper dive in looking at kind of the connection between MNPD and arrests, or domestic violence cases, alleged victims, that kind of thing, based on precinct? Because, in the past, like any new program, we tend to pilot, and it tends to be based on heat maps and, that are specifically tied to a precinct area. And so I'm just curious if y'all have had any work, or if you know of any data that is specific where it's making that connection.
DUI and domestic violence are 2 crimes that are committed across the county. And while, certain factors such as socioeconomic, such as age, can impact that, it's really something where we have not done the study as far as where the hot spots are, but my perception is that it's pretty universal across the city. If we were going to do this and wanted to start at a precinct, I would suggest that we ask Chief Drake or Chief Green and let them guide us on that. But we'd want to support them however they wanted to do a pilot on that.
Thank you for that. And then on the firearm dispossession piece, like as far as, there's obviously some challenges with that. Can you explain to me, how do we currently do today? Like, I guess I've heard like we just accept, like they're checking a box and saying, I have no guns. Is that how it's really working, or is there?
Yes,
Okay.
that is how it's really working.
That is how it's working.
We have started recently, Judge Floyd has been putting people, when they do say that they have a firearm, which is not that common, but when they are truthful and they say they do have firearms, he's been putting them on a docket to return to show proof, or he did this week, I guess. So that's good. But for the most part, it's very rare that somebody says that they have a gun.
Yeah.
They just say no.
Right. Okay. Thank you for answering that. And Councilmember Weiner, I'll recognize you for your questions. Oh, sorry. It would help if I turn your microphone on. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. I want to talk a minute about unintended consequences of both a change in the law or in the definition of domestic assault or domestic violence. What are the potential unintended consequences? And can you stipulate a profile of somebody or some way that we would be sure, or at whatever level the law would be changed or the wording would be changed, how do we know we're not causing a bigger problem? So that would be on the change in the wording. Similarly, if we're looking at your new program, what is the potential for unintended consequences there similarly?
Do you want me to talk to?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the first, to answer your first question, the unintended consequence of the legislative change. The first one that comes to mind are individuals that are in same-sex relationships who may be closeted and may be being abused by their partner. And they say nothing happened, nothing to see here, and that abuse continues. That would be the probably one and only major consequence that I could foresee. And then to answer your second question, and I'm just going to be very, very honest because he's nervous. I have a tendency to do that. So the first one are complaints of the DA's office dismissing more domestic violence cases. But I will stand here and say, as a prosecutor, I'm very proud of the cases that I do dismiss because it's my job to do the right thing, and sometimes that's the right thing. And then, the abuser being upset that we dismissed his case and he didn't have his day, or I'm using genders, I'm specifying, the abuser saying that they didn't have their day in court. So I can see that being also an unintended consequence.
Right. And so to go back to the definition very quickly, it would still be one of the qualifiers for domestic violence if it's an intimate partner. What would fall through the cracks with this change would be the folks that do not admit that they are intimate partners, but they are still roommates. And there would be some folks, even today, even in Nashville, who might not feel comfortable in telling the police that they are intimate partners. They would just describe themselves as roommates. But they would still be prosecuted for assault. It just would not come to the domestic assault courts. And so it's not like they fall completely through the cracks there. It just would not go to the domestic violence court.
Okay, are there any other laws written anywhere in the country that might be used as a model for what you're wanting to see done?
I'm sure of the 50 states, we've got probably 40, 45 different definitions of who qualifies for a victim of domestic violence. And we'd be glad to find a model that we would feel comfortable with to use as an example. Though we actually like our statute, we just think that one category makes the whole law too broad in ways that has a detriment on victims, defendants, and the criminal justice system.
I'm going to go out on a limb, my last question, Chair.
Okay.
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to assume that you've had this conversation with other DAs across the state.
I have had conversations about this with multiple DAs. We have not taken it up as a conference. It is not in our legislative package for this coming legislative session. But it is a law change that if it is proposed, then the conference would vote on do we support it, do we oppose it, or do we just take no position? I think probably the conference, I do not have an exact head count, but I believe we would say we would support it, but it is not going to be part of our package. There's no way it would be anything worse than just we're not going to take a position on it.
Okay,
Is
thank
my
you.
sense of the conference, but I haven't canvassed the entire 32 members.
Thank you.
Councilmember Nash.
Thank you, Chairman. Back to the definition legislative issue. When I first came out of the police department, it was not mandatory that you arrest a domestic violence if you could figure out who was the primary aggressor. And so this kind of, with the definition that's in there, that takes us a little step further in that they may or may not be intimate partners, but there's an assault that's gone on. And the reason we made that change in domestic violence was so that you could intervene and you didn't have to worry about the other person wanting to prosecute and the like. And are we creating an extra danger for those folks by just saying, oh, okay, well, you don't want to prosecute, you're going to be nice now, we'll leave. If we have to come back, we may have to make an arrest. I mean, I remember the old days. So I'm a little worried about that. What percentage of the cases fall into that category
Make your best estimate.
that take up your resources that you're worried about?
I mean, I would be making up a number if I gave you an exact percentage. I can say I've prepped my docket for tomorrow, and I have 4 roommate cases of about 25 cases. It's pretty high, and I understand what you're saying, but sometimes when you're doing that sort of justice balance, right? I can't get over what I see with, especially with the immigrant population. They're getting really disproportionately affected by this. I also have, roommates in college that are in a dorm situation. That comes up pretty frequently, just because we have so many colleges here in Nashville. So,
And is that something, I guess, that, can we come back to, I don't know if Deputy Chief Green or Captain Giles have a answer or perspective on that? You may not. Hello. Can you come, or would you be able to come to the microphone?
So I think everything that's been said here today will have to be considered as it relates to that legislative change. And as you stated, there's just a lot of dynamics as it relates to that. But because we're able to make that arrest, and we shall make that arrest, and that's in our policy and that's in the legislation, that takes those dynamics out of play, but it also creates a workload for them. So there's a lot of conversation that has to happen with that before we can make that decision and say, as it relates to that. So,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. Councilmember Nash, did you have any other questions?
My angst is around the fact that I know it's might be a college student, might be one of our immigrant population, but don't they deserve the same level of protection? Is what we're kind of coming. What gives me some angst here.
Well, absolutely, they deserve the same amount of protection, but we do not have in our criminal code the same punishment and the same criminal procedures for simple assault as we do for domestic assault. And what we're trying to do is take something that really is not about the power and control of an intimate partner relationship or the power and control of a generational violence and treat it just like a regular fight on Lower Broad or a regular fight that might happen at a softball field if people get into an argument. That's really what a roommate argument is. 2 kids in a dorm at Vanderbilt that are roommates get into a fight. That's not about the power and control of boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife situation. And so I think that recognizes that essentially too much has been swept into our domestic violence law, and we're trying to make sure that the proper balance is reestablished. Also, while the policy is you make all these arrests to try to kind of take the officer discretion out of situations with domestic violence, I think 2 college roommates that get into a fight, we really ought to trust our police officers to exercise proper discretion and make arrests when necessary, because I have great confidence in their ability to make those decisions, just like they make decisions on drug cases and robbery cases and theft cases. And they use that in every case pretty much other than domestic violence. And when it's a case that's really just about an assault, or maybe not an assault, then we should treat that like all other cases, not the specifically targeted set of tools that we use to protect folks that are the victims of this act that are partners or married or have that type of relationship.
Point taken. Thank you.
Okay. All right?
Did you have any, I guess, kind of thinking about, one of the core things that we have been just talking about is the speed to disposition of a case and kind of the amount of time it takes, and it does take a lot of time, but is it fair to say that, one of your recommendations, that if we could figure out how to peel off some of those cases, that's going to help kind of increase the speed factor that's been more of a challenge?
The shorter the dockets, the shorter the continuances, the quicker we get to disposition. Every minute that goes by from the time that a victim of domestic violence picks up the phone to the time that the case is disposed of, all the pressures are on that victim to drop the case or to stop showing up or to move on with their life or just to get back under the thumb of their abuser. So for all those reasons, I think that would just have a natural reaction of speeding up the judicial process. As far as other suggestions with regards to speeding up the judicial process, whenever the courts set dockets, we will be present and we are ready to go, starting with our early intervention meetings that happen in about half of we ask on all the interpersonal violence cases, but starting with the day after when we reach out to them and have our initial contact with them. So we'll be ready, no matter how fast the courts can do it, and we want it as quickly as possible, but we want to stay in our lane, and we'll be ready, but we'll support anything that the courts decide to do with regards to how they docket these cases.
Okay. And then on the Y program, I think you said how many people it's served so far, but I didn't write it down. Did you tell me, or did you tell us when you were talking about the new program?
We've made 40 referrals since
For-
June.
40 referrals?
Yes,
Okay, cool.
since June.
All right. Thank you so much.
Great.
I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from the Sheriff's Office. So I will invite our Sheriff's Office participants to come up, and if you could introduce yourself to YouTube.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Carla West. I'm the Sheriff's Chief of Staff here in Davidson County. Also with me today is our Deputy Chief of Staff, our legal counsel as well, Kelly Oliver. I appreciate you all letting us be part of this conversation today. As you probably already know, the Davidson County Sheriff's Office role is limited when it comes to the subject, but I do want you to know that where we are involved, we do work to excel. In specific reference to the informational brief that was provided by the Metro Nashville Office of Family Safety, and when the Sheriff's Office is mentioned on page 12, a couple of months ago, we did designate areas in our facilities to allow the GPS monitoring companies to come into the jails and allow them to place inmates on the device prior to release. So I believe that was the one area where the Sheriff's Office was mentioned. We are also responsible for service of process when it comes to all orders of protection in Davidson County. In the last 5 years, we have seen an 18% increase in the number of orders of protection received. Based on our current trends, that's 4,453 OPs for 2024 compared to 3,769 in 2020. We have a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week orders of protection unit consisting of 12 employees, and upon receipt of an OP and to expedite the process, we place the defendant on notice by phone immediately. This is a process we have streamlined in recent years. We have 2 teams of 2 officers who serve the physical paper in person, or the defendant may choose to come to our headquarters for personal service. If we can't find the individual based on the OP information, we will communicate that with the victim and try to ascertain the best information about the defendant's whereabouts. If the person is arrested for another crime, we can serve that OP via video and booking. If all means are exhausted, a paper is returned as not found, but can be reactivated for up to 1 year should we receive more information. While the number of OPs has increased by 18%, our rate of not found is at an all-time low of 0.3%. Additionally, for more than 30 years, we have operated the Sheriff's Anti-Violence Effort, or SAVE, program. It's state certified and a 6-week batters intervention program. When it began, it was the only one of its kind in the state of Tennessee. It's offered to incarcerated individuals, and over 100 inmates graduate annually. It educates participants on how their behavior has affected those around them, how is it harmful and has a lasting impact, helps them to identify abusive behavior, learn new and non-harmful ways of expressing emotions and thoughts, and how to accept responsibility and accountability. We also offer a batters intervention program, which is also state certified. That's through our day reporting program. Year to date, we've had about 100 completions of that program. We have 4 full-time staff administering these programs and have formed many effective partnerships to assist in accomplishing our goals, including the Domestic Violence Coalition, the Metro Office of Family Safety, and the Tommy Burks Victim Assistance Academy. We don't have any specific improvements or funding requests, but know that the Sheriff's Office, we continually evaluate our processes and program to ensure we are delivering the best in public service. And I'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much. I've got a couple.
Sure.
As far as the space in jail, so that's physical space where it's designated for the GPS monitoring companies to come.
That is correct.
And so at what point, like, we went to when we were court watching last week. So there was a case, we just left the courtroom, and there was a case where somebody should have gotten a monitor but didn't get their monitor. And so is that because the company didn't come? I mean, I guess I just don't know enough about the case, but could it have been the company didn't come to the sheriff's office? And I may hear about this a little bit more later on. I'm kind of asking questions about GPS monitoring out loud. That was confusing to me in that moment.
Kelly Oliver she knows the specific process as it relates to GPS monitoring, so I'll let her answer that.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Chairwoman, it could be a variety of factors. It could have been that. We are currently in meetings that we have about every other week with stakeholders such as the criminal court clerk's office to streamline the process and to outline whose responsibility is it to do every step of this. At this point, what has been agreed to, we are in the RFP process to get a vendor who is the approved GPS provider, but we're not there yet. So in the meantime, we have to figure out what do we do. What is the current practice is that the bonding company is responsible for contacting that GPS provider and making arrangements with that GPS provider to show up and outfit the defendant with the device. So it was probably a failure or a breakdown in communication there, but the operating understanding currently is that the bonding company contacts the GPS provider.
Okay, and so the clerk's office, so you're currently going through a process right now at the clerk's office to basically do a process map and walk through the whole process, and then which stakeholders across the entire system would be responsible for which piece?
Yes.
Okay. Is that something, like, if you're undergoing it now, is that something that you anticipate having implementation, I guess, of whatever comes out of it, in the new year, or is that something that is going to be faster than that?
We are hoping for faster than that. I think that we have outlined the way that it should be done. We just have to commit it to writing. For example, there was an issue that came up about who is to provide the GPS company with the victim information because they have to set parameters on this device. And so we're in talks about should it be a standing order from the courts? How do we want to do that? And then once we have, I think we only have one final meeting left, famous last words, to put all of this in writing about who is going to do what.
Oh, okay. And then can you also speak to kind of the language access side of your work in the sheriff's office, and then the BIP program and that aspect of what you do?
Sure. So for these day reporting programs and even inside the jails for treatment programs or classes such as BIP, we have always had an arrangement with the courts that they obviously will mandate someone to these programs, and then they have helped us logistically provide the interpreters, and we have split the cost. That's happened for years without something expressly in writing about whose responsibility it is to do this, but it's always worked fine. You know, we're the government. That's how it goes sometimes. We are currently working on an MOU that will outline that cost sharing, and what we're doing in the meantime until that MOU is finalized is invoices for interpreting services are just being sent to us at DCSO for these programs so that we pay to make sure that we have an interpreter available for a class that needs a non-English speaker, such as Arabic or Spanish.
Okay, thank you for answering that. And then, is the sheriff's office notifying, well, I guess, is the sheriff's office giving the defendant a copy of the bond conditions, like as part of their package of information that they're receiving?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. How about questions from, it looks like Councilmember Weiner and Councilmember Benton? Do either of you have any questions? Go ahead, Councilmember Weiner.
You asked them.
Oh, I did? Okay.
You did such a good job.
All right, good deal. Then if we have no other questions, I so appreciate you all being here. Thank you. And we'll probably come back and we may have more. All right, let's transition into court conversation. And so we'll hear from, I believe, is it Presiding Judge Allegra Walker? Are you representing? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening, and thank you all for inviting us over. Currently, I'm in General Sessions Court in the Domestic Violence Division. So there are three of us, Judge Escobar, who is here, Judge Floyd, who is here.
Can you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Judge Escobar, who handles the dockets with our with General Sessions Court, as well as Judge Floyd. I've been there for 10 years, and the whole 10 I've done the domestic violence work. So this is something that I'm very passionate about, as well as the others are passionate about doing as well. Currently, in terms of numbers, year to date, we have handled 4,200 defendants with domestic violence cases, which is a lot. You just heard the numbers about the numbers surrounding the orders of protection, which is about 4,400 cases. So traditionally, those cases have all been together. So you have a bond docket, those defendants who are out on bond, you have a jail docket, and traditionally the orders of protection have been placed into the jail docket to run simultaneously. So in terms of new things to talk about that I think everybody is pleased about, we have, because of the increase of the orders of protection, and it's great to know that that increase was 18% because we can see it and feel it on a day-to-day basis, because what we were seeing, it typically will almost overrun the courtroom with hearings, with the length of the hearings, if there are attorneys involved, and those matters they're litigated, and they can take hours and hours. In the meantime, attorneys are on hold, defendants are on hold, they have domestic cases, witnesses, victims are on hold, police officers, everybody is on hold. Or, we can integrate cases in, but it makes for a very, very long day. And I know prosecutors have had issues with being able to keep victims, because at 1 or 2 o'clock, if my case is not heard and we're stuck on a big docket during hearings, then people don't want to stay. They can't afford to stay for various reasons. So what General Sessions judges have voted to do was to separate the order of protection docket away from the domestic violence docket. That's going to allow us to have full-time attention to jail docket cases that are very important. And then we have full-time attention to orders of protection cases that deserve that attention as well. Judge Kimbrough Hayes, who's also here this evening, has joined our team. She is in her former life. She did a lot of the domestic violence work with the Tennessee Coalition, so she's very familiar with that. She had joined our team this past year with doing some of the order of protection cases, just to take a few of the cases off of our docket and to free some things up. So this will be very helpful. We hear about almost 400 OPs a month, which is a lot. So all four of us will rotate through those dockets every 3 months. So that will, I think, make a lot of people happy. It'll make the court more efficient. When we talk about victim safety, then that's right up there along with it, because you will have time and attention to hear those cases, and not have to split time and attention with mixing the two together. So that is what's new and on the horizon that we are very excited about. The other thing that we are excited about is the mentee grant, a domestic violence mentee grant. So St. Louis County in St. Louis, Missouri, awarded us through the Office of, Office of Violence Against Women, sorry. OVW. Anyway, they have teamed up, give us a 1-year grant, and we are very excited about that. We just met with them today at 3:00. So they really will provide us wraparound services, to be honest. So they will help us with technical assistance. They will help us with orders of protection. In fact, they will help us with this compliance docket. We have a compliance docket. We've had it for about a year. I'm not sure how effective that it is, to be honest, but they do some things with the compliance docket, with firearms dispossession, with compliance with drug abuse, with BIPs, that we're very excited about learning. So we will get all those tools and resources. They provide training to us. They can provide training to district attorneys that may need that. They're providing various other resources, forms, just whatever we need, they're willing to do. We will go up there and observe their dockets and how they run court and learn a little, firsthand about what they're doing. And they will come here a couple of times within the year to also observe our courts and see what we're doing and then provide some professional critique of that. So we're very excited about that. We think this will totally push the work forward that we're doing in the domestic violence realm. And of course, victim safety is always at the top of the list, as well as offender accountability. So that is my short presentation.
Thank you. And that is very exciting about getting that additional support through the grant work. So thank you for sharing that with our group. I guess one question that I have, because it is really exciting to hear about the transition on the orders of protection and kind of that dedicated focus. And so do you feel like that's going to alleviate like that 15-day concern about the amount of time it takes to hear? And I know when we were in the court last week, we heard from Judge Escobar, who spoke a little bit to that, just to our group, and some of the steps that they've taken to reduce the amount of time.
I'm not really sure if I understand the question. So you do have 15 days to be heard.
Right.
Those cases are sometimes continued for various reasons. Usually there's some companion cases that are criminal cases, where attorneys may ask that case to be continued along with a criminal case. It may be continued because one of the litigants wants to retain counsel. It can be continued for a various number of reasons. So I don't really foresee there be an issue.
Oh, no, I guess in some of the data that we had originally looked at, that was provided by the Office of Family Safety, there was some charts that reference kind of the time period to hear the OPs. And I understand about the kind of connection to the criminal cases and that kind of thing. And so, yeah. And so I don't know, Judge Escobar, if you want to speak to anything related to what you told us, but reducing the amount of time. And so it sounds like, and maybe I'm not understanding, but whenever an OP is aligned with the criminal case, is it then resetting the amount of time, I guess, related to the statute?
It does reset that case.
Got it.
But we offer opportunities for people to have those cases heard on that day. It just depends on a lot of things.
Okay.
Sometimes the defendant and the attorney will ask for that to be continued to a criminal case that it's attached to. So those cases, when they occur like that, they will still go with their companion criminal case, and they will be heard on either a 4B or a 4C domestic violence docket.
Got it. So if they still elect to make that decision to have it align with the criminal case, they'll be able to continue to do that.
Correct.
Okay. How about questions for Judge Walker? Councilmember Weiner, I'm disappointed in you.
You're just asking really good ones.
Okay. It looks like Commander Nash, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Along with our chairman, I think there was some concern that we heard when you get those cases connected, that the orders of protection with the criminal case, that it does keep the order of protection being heard maybe as timely as it should be for the gun disposition process, for getting near you. And I know that there was some concern that the victim often doesn't have an attorney there representing them at that case so that they can object to those being tied together. Is there any fix for that within the courts?
I'm not sure if there's really any fix. You know, it always troubles me as a judge to have to, you know, when people are not represented, people sometimes get in trouble. So it is often troublesome for me when folks come in without representation, because sometimes things happen. But let me just say this, and these are total different. I have a judicial perspective. So I always say you have your prosecutor, you have your defense attorney, the judge comes down the middle. And then surrounding that, you'll have an advocacy perspective as well. Oftentimes they have things in common, and oftentimes everybody has to get in their lane, right? So with the judicial perspective that I have, the judiciary has to take everybody in account. So we have to, victim safety. We also have to protect the rights of defendants as well. And then we also have to work with the advocacy community, and everybody works together to the best of their ability. And that's really, we love Family Safety Center. We love Gene Crow. They have excellent services. But all of our wishes and wants with the court system are not always totally in alignment because of where we sit.
I hear you. Thank you. The other issue is there was some concern or the possibility of the orders of protection all going to one court, going upstairs or across the street. Is that still in discussion, and do you see any value in that?
I was not a part of that discussion and know nothing of that discussion. Those cases are general session cases. I'm presiding judge of General Sessions Court, and our body voted to move those cases out of the 4B docket and make their own separate docket to be able to efficiently handle cases.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Benton.
So let's say that these order protection and criminal case are tied together, and it gets delayed, or there's a better legal term, I'm sure.
Continue, delayed.
There should have already been, and I'm going to get this one wrong too, ex parte that was set as the commissioner sets, right? It's kind of a junior order protection in my layman's. So that still continues, right? So
It does continue.
Okay.
It will continue.
So they still have that protection while they're waiting. Now, what's the difference between that temporary ex parte
And the permanent,
versus a more permanent one? Is
it's a
it,
big difference.
okay, so help me understand that.
So the
Because we're
difference-
going to get delayed.
The big difference in that, in that ex parte, you don't have to be dispossessed of your firearms. So that's a really big deal in the community. So we're totally in alignment with advocacy community, with the prosecuting community, with us. It's a concern for everybody, right? So that's a big difference. So with the permanent, it also gives you a little more teeth legally. So you can prosecute on the violation of that order of protection, that make it a misdemeanor, and you can do some different things with that. So those are the two main points.
What about GPS?
So with the GPS, GPS is affecting if you're charged with that aggravated assault, the domestic violence aggravated assault.
And that should have been taken care of by the night court way back?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, we do have the ability to put GPS on other domestic violence crimes. So like rape cases or aggravated kidnapping type cases can also have the GPS ordered as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember Benton. I know that kind of originally when we were initially starting to talk about some of these issues, some of the biggest discussion has been centered around making sure that there was access to the NCIC database, part 3, and, you know, some of Judge Todd's advocacy. Do you have any perspective on that? I know that's been, you know, just a discussion that we've been hearing about. It's been in the news, and making sure that those commissioners have the appropriate support to be able to appropriately, you know, set whatever bond is necessary.
Since that is Judge Todd's baby, I'm going to let him bring it. I'm going to let him bring
Bring it to the podium.
all that information to you all.
Okay, thank you, Judge Walker.
Thank you. It may take a little bit longer. If it's okay, I want to kind of give an overview of the bond system, where we are now and where we want to go, okay? So as we all know, Tennessee operates as a cash bail system, and it operates as a bail bond agent system, meaning that once you're arrested and bond is set, you can get out by posting cash on your own, or you can hire a bail bond agent to do it who will charge you a 10% fee, okay? So when a person is arrested, 90% of the cases, unless it's a grand jury indictment and a preset bond is done, those bonds are going to be set by the magistrate when the person is booked in. The state legislature mandates things that a magistrate must look at in order to determine the bond, like ties to the community, prior criminal record, prior failures to appear, is it a crime against a person, financial conditions, so on and so forth. And the magistrate goes down those factors, looks at the probable cause, and sets a bond. One of the problems, obviously, that we have is that we do not know the person's out-of-state criminal record or out-of-county criminal record. That's important, obviously, because the statute says you have to look at criminal record, number one, and you have to look at ties to the community. If you have a criminal record outside the community, then that's a factor. It may shock you to know that only 2 court systems in the entire state currently have access to NCIC out-of-county criminal access: Chattanooga City Court and Jackson City Court. Historically, the state legislature has written laws that say it is the police department's job to provide magistrates with a defendant's criminal record once they're booked in. That law was watered down last year, July 1st. It now says that the police department should make a best effort to do that. When I'm talking about we, there's a magistrate committee in the General Sessions Court. Judge Walker, Judge Escobar, Judge Kimbrough Hayes have talked to the police about this, met with Chief Drake, and we understand that it is virtually impossible for Metro Police to do that. As the chief pointed out, various divisions of the police department have access to what is called NCIC III, but NCIC is governed by the FBI, distributed in Tennessee by the TBI, and their procedural rules would require that the printout of the NCIC records be given to the magistrate and then be destroyed. That is impossible for the police officers to do. The officers don't have access to it in their cars, and even if they did, they'd have no way to print it out. So, when I met with you, Diana and I met with you last time, we had met with TBI, along with Kyle Sowell, who's here, the General Sessions Administrator, and they had told us unequivocally, our magistrates cannot have access to NCIC. Yesterday, that changed. In a Zoom meeting with the TBI, they told us they had contacted the FBI, and the FBI has now green-lighted our magistrates to have access to NCIC. I believe the problem is that our magistrates have jurisdiction over civil matters, mental health commitment, and OPs. And the FBI rules and regulations regarding NCIC records say that they cannot be used for anything civil. So they wanted to make sure there was some sort of what we call a Chinese wall in our magistrate office to make sure that anything civil was going to be kept away. So we now do have the ability, or don't have the ability, have permission to have our magistrates run NCIC records, but hold off on that, okay? A lot of crimes have statutory bond conditions. Some domestic offenses, some DUI offenses. What we hope to do in Davidson County is enable our magistrates, our general sessions judges, and our trial court judges to also put bond conditions on defendants on every offense. 8 o'clock curfew, no guns, stay away from Target, whatever it may be. Bond conditions are only helpful if they can be enforced. The first issue that we have run up against, and we are in the process of fixing with the help of Mr. Gentry's office, the criminal court clerk, is we are coming up with uniformed computer forms for bond conditions that the magistrate will have an access to, the general sessions judges will have an access to, and the trial courts will have access to. So whenever a defendant comes before a magistrate, sessions court, or criminal court judge, and they want to tinker with bond conditions, they can pull up that form, see what the current ones are, and amend them, and they'll stay up to date. Number two, last year we went to the legislature and we said we want help in enforcing bond conditions. And they passed a law that now says it's a Class A misdemeanor to violate bond conditions. You can be arrested on the spot. Why is that important? Well, prior to that law, if a person violated a condition of bond, the only procedural remedy would be for the district attorney's office to file a motion in court to revoke or alter the bond. The clerk would set that, notify the defense attorney, and in 2 or 3 weeks, you'd have a hearing. Not good. So now we have the ability to arrest on the spot, persons put into custody. General Funk has established an email address. I think it's bondconditions@jis.nashville.gov. So the officer who is on the street with his computer or her computer can email the DA right there saying, I just caught Jim Todd. He violated a bond condition. He's in custody. So those bond conditions also have to be given to the defendant. And the defendant has to sign them. Because if the defendant does not, there's no way to prove that the defendant was on notice of the bond conditions and violated them. So that's a very big issue. So what we are asking Metro Council is to fund, as soon as possible, 6 administrative assistants for the magistrates. Kyle has worked very hard on this. He knows the figures. But what these administrative assistants would do, we would still want them to run the NCIC and not have 17 different magistrates do it. We have 17 magistrates, number one. Number two, the administrative assistants would also be the ones that go meet with the defendants, go over their conditions, ties to the community, all that kind of stuff, and give them the bond conditions and have them sign them. So now we have them on notice of what they are. Number three, the administrative assistants would also assist with orders of protections, especially as it relates to non-English speaking litigants, because the magistrates get jammed up with police business and so oftentimes the order of protections are put off to the side. And number four, this is a biggie. Dean Marie, is that the name of it? Debbie Marie. The Debbie Marie law mandates that magistrates reach out to victims and notify them of bond conditions, ask them if they want to have the app on their phone, ask them what zones of exclusion they want. That is going to be virtually impossible for the magistrates to do. So we are asking the council to fund as soon as possible 6 administrative assistants for the magistrates for the purpose of assisting with bond conditions, assisting with OPs, assisting with the new Debbie Marie Act. And it's very, very, very important. So that's kind of where we are. Now, the other thing that's going on that you should know about, and he spoke about this earlier, is that the officers who are on the street right now have a system in their patrol cars called ARMS. And whenever somebody's pulled over, they look them up in ARMS and see what their record, what they know about them and all this kind of stuff. They don't have access to bond conditions and they don't have access to out-of-county records. What ARMS will tell them is that Jim Todd has a pending case, and as we just talked to the cap, it'll show on bond but it won't show conditions. The only thing it'll tell you to do is call the clerk's office. So the officer has to physically call the clerk's office and say, what are the bond conditions, okay? And then those conditions may not be up to date because they're paper, okay? So the clerk's office, Mr. Gentry, and the police department are currently working together to merge the bond conditions and put them into the ARMS system. So that form that I talked about that's going to be computerized will automatically go into ARMS and will always be updated. And the officer who pulls me over at 10 o'clock at night with a taillight out will find out that I'm on bond and I'm supposed to be in at 8 o'clock and can arrest me on the spot and email General Funk. That's where we're headed, but we need help to get there. Did I cover it all, Diane? So the Cadillac of this would be like the federal court system. The federal court system has a division of pretrial release. I don't like to use that term because that is confusing with what the sheriff has. I call it a bond supervision unit. In the federal system, you don't post money. You promise a bond, and obviously if you do something wrong, the federal government has the ability to get the money because they have the IRS. But you get released and you're under supervision, meaningful supervision. The Office of Federal Pretrial Release requires you to come and see them on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis, monthly basis, whatever the judge wants. Requires you to pee in a cup, requires you to have a job. Their officers go to the houses and search them and make sure there are no guns, which would obviously help with the gun issue with domestic violence. When I came on the bench, I spoke with the sheriff's office about maybe pilot projecting this. They said they couldn't do it. If I had to come up with an idea of this is something that should be run by the courts. Never told you this, did I? Obviously, that's problematic because we have a state trial court system and then we have Metro Sessions Court, but the courts are the ones that should have this program to go supervise people on bond. On a side note, the bond conditions, and if we ever get to the bond supervision office, that would enable judges to set lower cash bonds and ensure safety of the community at the same time. There are a lot of people who speak, rightfully so, with a loud voice about the disparity of locking up people who are poor versus people who are rich. It's very difficult for all of us to lower bonds on violent offenses when we can't ensure safety of the community. And so oftentimes we set high bonds because we know they can't afford it because we're afraid they're going to harm the public. But with conditions that now the police will see, that the police can enforce, and maybe down the road, some supervision unit that can help monitor, we would help make Nashville a lot safer place, I think, personally. So questions before
I have a question. So when you were talking about the transition of that paper form into the system and everything with Clerk Gentry's office, so
Right.
when is that going to happen? And
Julian Sloss is the person who could answer that question the last time. Kyle, do you remember when we met with him last time, what he said?
It's going to take several months. The JIS is working and
Yeah,
the programming.
So Kyle said that when we met, and I think that was about 4 weeks ago, he said it would take several months because of the interface with JIS.
Okay.
So we're months away from that, and we're even farther away from the interface with CJIS and ARMS, but it's in the works.
got it. And so that'll solve the issue about bond conditions and where they're recorded. Because
Correct.
they'll be in that one system.
Correct.
Okay. That sounds
We gave
really worthwhile.
we gave you the figures for the administrative assistants,
Yes,
correct?
I have those. Yes, sir.
Show me the money.
How about questions for Judge Todd? Let me get Councilmember Benton, you're recognized.
So in the Cadillac system, how many people do you think?
Don't know. I don't know. Sorry if I interrupted.
You already know the question.
Yeah, I did. And Karen Fentress, did you go when we went to federal court? Okay. So Ms. Oliver and Karen Fentress in the sheriff's office and myself went to the federal courthouse and met with their pretrial office and talked about how many people they had, how many people they supervised. And to be honest with you, once the sheriff's office kind of said, we can't do that. It's stalled. And so I haven't done the research to know how many people we have on bond and how many people will be supervised and what their, I can't remember what they told us their ratio was of officer to supervision. So I don't know the answer to your question.
So, but that's something you could
Sure.
go ahead and look at it again and then
Yep.
just kind of get back to us.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Councilmember Weiner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to tag on to what Councilmember Benton just shared. So are there any such systems, your Cadillac system, are there any such systems in any other local
Not
court
that I'm
system?
aware of.
Okay, so this would be,
You'd be the first.
that would be lovely. If you would, as you move forward with this, I'm sure that the chair would be happy to bring you back to the committee to keep us apprised and whatever help we can offer. I'm all for lower bond and greater safety,
We
especially.
need the administrative assistance.
Oh,
We can't
we're
wait
on
till the
that.
next budget cycle. We need it now.
We heard that loud and clear.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Judge Todd. How
Thanks.
about Councilmember Nash? Did you have anything?
Just, I'm impressed with all the judges and the collaboration, the work they're trying to do to fix some of these problems in the system. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Todd. And so Judge Walker, so based on everything Judge Todd says, it sounds like you all are in alignment. This is necessary, needed, and something you'd like council to pursue, right? Okay, thank you. Last but not least, Chancellor, come on down. We're going to hear about the state trial courts.
And Commander Nash, this will help answer your question about the upstairs courts, if you will. I'm Chancellor Ann Martin. I'm the presiding judge of the 20th Judicial District, which are the state trial courts here that include the 18 judges, which are 8 circuit judges, 6 criminal court judges, and 4 chancellors. This is Bart Pickett, who is our trial court administrator. And as you'll hear, for purposes of today, Bart's responsibilities include everything like budgeting, facilities, juries, personnel, interpreters, security, all those issues, which are all issues that would be impacted by some of the proposals that have been made about sort of moving some cases from one place to another. So let me tell you about our courts a little bit, and then Bart's going to give you some numbers about the OP and the DV cases we're hearing now, and we're going to talk about some of the issues that the proposals are raised. So as I said, we have 8 circuit judges. We have 2 that are dedicated just to domestic cases. And one of those judges, Stephanie Williams in the 4th District, she is over the OPs that the circuit court hears right now. There's a special master who hears OPs who, and if somebody wants to appeal up or have it reviewed, it would go to Judge Williams. And then one of those circuit judges only hears probate cases. So we have 5 generalists, and oversimply, circuit court hears cases usually that involve non-liquidated damages, medical malpractice cases, car accident cases, anything that involves an injury or has a major injury component where it's not liquidated in nature versus like what Chancery Court hears. I hear lots of contract disputes, real estate disputes, appeals from the state and Metro, those kinds of things. All of us hear jury cases, but I would say traditionally Chancery hears the fewest, Circuit hears more, and then of course every criminal case, if it goes to trial, gets heard by a jury. We have 6 criminal court judges, and they're located across the street in the Birch Building, also where the general sessions judges are, and they hear all kinds of felony cases, cases that are bound over for felonies. They also have 2 specialized recovery courts, including DC4, which is the inpatient recovery program that is overseen, and they also oversee the grand juries. So in the historic courthouse, the chancellors and the circuit judges are here, and that is relevant when we talk about security and cases coming across the street. And then the criminal court judges, along with the criminal court clerk, are in the Birch Building, along with the general sessions judges. And all of the Birch Building also has all the offices or services that service people who are going through the criminal court system. like probation, those kinds of things, all the sort of monitoring agencies and the affiliated services that help the judges who hear criminal cases function. A couple of things. So the state trial court judges are a function of the state system. So I'm a state employee. I get paid by the state. I participate in the state system. There are 32 judicial districts, and each of them get funding from the state for their districts. We in Nashville, in the 20th Judicial District, are very lucky to have significant metro funding. My colleagues in rural districts have one administrative assistant in their whole office to help them do their job. You know, I have a full-time lawyer who works for me, who's a smart person who sits and research and writes all day long, and I couldn't do my job without her because of the kind of practice I have. Our criminal court judges, by public act, have 6 security officers on their staff, which is also important when we talk about things coming across the street and so forth. We also have tremendous technology and facilities and all these other things, again, that Metro pays for. But technically, we are state trial courts. We are regulated by the Administrative Office of the Courts, which is a state agency, and our funding and our existence comes from the General Assembly. And both Bart and I watched the whole tape of the October 16th presentation and watched Diane's presentation, and there was a discussion about things like weighted caseload and case studies, and all those things happen at the state level through the comptroller's office to look at how busy judges are or should be or seem to be and how many you have in each district and all that stuff. And there is a process coming up to do that in the spring and that we will participate in, but it hadn't started yet. So the judges are state employees. We have some state money to fund our staff, and then the rest are paid by Metro. So like I have 3 staff members, and one is primarily paid by the state, but is a hybrid, and then 2 other people who are paid by Metro, and so forth and so on. And the reason that's important, because when you look at where these cases are heard and how the resources to hear the cases are funded, it's sort of a state versus Metro deal, even though we get significant funding from Metro. So we are really glad to be involved in this discussion and think it is extremely important, and we're really interested in being part of the solution. All 18 of us have not had a chance to meet since these discussions have come up about where these cases are heard and how to adjust that. And we make decisions as a district. We make budget requests as a district. And any change in how the cases are heard would impact everybody. Right now, we have the special master who hears OP cases that only involve people who are or were married or people who have children. And there's the domestic part of that I understand because I think it's considered a sort of a component of having the divorce courts. I don't know about the component of the cases that involve children, how those came over to us. And there have been discussions for years, I think, about where's the best place for cases to be heard, who has the resources and so forth. And I think at some point that shift had occurred. So anyway, that's sort of so that you understand the different courts and how we work. The state trial courts are considered what's called courts of record, and our decisions get appealed up to the state courts of appeal and then to the Supreme Court. The general sessions courts are not courts of record, although they hear things to the end of disposition and their decisions are final unless appealed and so forth and so on. It's just a different system. So So any change in where cases are heard and how they're heard are going to involve some really important issues about facilities, budgets, personnel, buy-in from the judges who would be impacted, all of those things. So Bart's done some research about how many OPs we hear versus what Sessions hears, how they're handled. The other issue that you have to keep in mind is we have different clerks' offices who are the custodians of these files, collect the fees for these files, any fees associated with any monitoring or anything. And it's sort of complicated, but we have Joseph Day, who's the circuit court clerk, who's responsible for the general sessions and the circuit courts. We have Howard Gentry, who is over the criminal courts. They're both constitutional officers who are elected in the state or, by the county. And while they are there to support the courts, we don't control them and they don't control us, if that makes any sense. Everybody has a job to do and does those jobs. So where cases are handled and who is ultimately responsible for all of those components for something to successfully get through the system involves the clerk's offices as well as the judges. So Bart's going to talk to you about some statistics, and then we don't have really solutions, but we have issues that we're considering, and our judges will be meeting before the end of the year, and this is going to be on our list.
Good evening. The Chancellor covered a whole lot of that, but just want to go over some statistics that I found out. I think it's been referenced. General Sessions hears about 80% of the orders of protection. From 2023, that was 3,113, and that was by 3 to 4 of their judges. And then through Monday of this week, October 28th, there was 2,960 that had been filed in General Sessions. Whereas in Circuit Court, through our special master, we handled 897 orders of protection last year. And then there were 694 dispositions of firearm cases that were related to those. We had 166 cases that were appealed essentially from the special master to Circuit Court. And thus far this year, we've had 652 OPs filed as of October 28th of this year. So again, that's about 20% of the OPs that we hear in Davidson County in Circuit Court. As the Chancellor said, it's different clerk's office, different facilities and issues. The OPs currently are heard in one courtroom upstairs at 510. It's our only open courtroom to the sense that a judge is not assigned, but 3 days a week it's used for the OPs. 1 day a week it's used by the probate special master for probate hearings. For domestic violence cases, I've reached out to the criminal court clerk's office to get some numbers. I'm still waiting to hear back on those, but at least based on the AOC's fiscal year 23 report, there were at least 480 domestic violence cases or cases defined as offenses against the family or person filed in the 20th Judicial District last year, but I think it's more than that depending on how they're categorized. And again, so those cases currently are heard by our criminal court judges with their staff that have the 6 court officers assigned to them and their criminal court clerk. So.
Thank you for that
I
information.
just wanted to tell
Absolutely.
you sort of where we've come to. I didn't mean
Okay.
to interrupt you, Council Lady.
No, go for it.
So there's some things that we're looking at. If there was a consideration of moving OP cases across the street and then moving some percentage of domestic violence cases, which we don't know what those are, that are heard by our criminal court judges, that would be heard by circuit judges, do our circuit judges have the capacity to hear the DV cases or the OP cases? We would need extra staff. If we took the OP cases that General Sessions was hearing, right now we use special masters. We don't have courtrooms or extra special masters to do that. How would the sort of case handling and fee distribution go between the General Sessions courts and the circuit courts, or the circuit court and the criminal court clerk? How are we going to have sufficient security for the judges who right now only hear civil cases? And, there is not a person anywhere near we have security for the building, and when we have court going on the 4th, 5th, and 6th floors, there is always a security officer, but the circuit court judges, as a general matter, don't have anybody who work for them who acts in sort of a security capacity. There may be somebody with some of that role, but it is not like what the criminal court judges have. And then, obviously we would have to get buy-in from our judges, because this would be a drastic change from how things are done now and the kinds of cases they hear. I will tell you, as I said, that we have an all-judge meeting scheduled before the end of the year. I have talked to about a third of our state trial court judges since these issues came up, and particularly since the communications last week about what kinds of things the committee was interested in hearing today. And there is very much openness to looking at all solutions to be helpful, but we also recognize that we have a tremendous set of general sessions judges who are very busy working on these cases and doing a terrific job. We will have to look at how this would impact budget allocations too. I'll tell you, last year on our wish list was to have somebody who a bond supervision person that the criminal court judges, and we did not get those funds, because we go through budgeting process as a group every year and talk about our needs and sort of vote on our top 3 wish list items and put a number with them. And it might be something for the probate court. It might be something for one of the criminal court judges. It might be something that, impacts everybody, like additional interpreters. We have 2 Spanish-speaking interpreters on the state trial court staff who cover criminal and civil courts. And then when we have litigants who speak other languages, the administrative office of the courts through the state pays for them, and we arrange for them to be available, assuming we know we're going to have that need. So that's everything.
Thank you. That's a lot, and I know it's a lot for your work and thinking about the future, and thanks for including this as part of your overall discussion with everybody, that's part of your team. I guess kind of related to that, thinking about alignment, like your all-judge meeting is at the end of the year, you'll have budget requests that will, be submitted to the mayor's office. They'll go through that vetting process before we ever end up hearing about it. And so when we're thinking about kind of some of the recommendations, like from the Office of Family Safety about the potential shift, it's kind of like, how will we have greater alignment across your work and the other judges, the General Sessions Court, kind of related to the direction and the future and the vision, and like what aspects of the recommendations can be implemented or may need more discussion, those kinds of things. Like how does that potentially work across all the stakeholders?
Well, the General Sessions judges are a different set of judges than we are. They're funded differently,
Right.
and their jurisdiction is different.
Yes.
So if there was a shift, there's sort of the bucket of money Metro spends to operate the General Sessions courts, and they have certain jurisdictions set by state law. Then there's a bucket of money that Metro contributes to the state trial courts to help us do what we do. We do meet and talk about budget needs. I think that it's dollars are very important because we just don't have the special masters and the money to do it. But I think it's a much larger discussion about who has jurisdiction over what and how that's going to work, because you take cases from one place and you put cases another place. That causes a shift in a whole lot of things.
Yeah, so it's alignment on resources and alignment on vision, capacity, all those other things across the 2 courts.
That being said, our judges are very open, and I know everybody is very flexible and is, interested in the administration of justice appropriately. I just think we have to figure out who and how is the best way to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Councilmember Toombs has a question.
Thank you, Chair. I had a clarification question on your budget process, your internal process. Are you deciding as a group, we're just going to ask for these 3 things and submitting that, or are you submitting everything? Explain how that works.
We're supposed to only ask for 3 things, as I understand.
Not to correct the Chancellor, we prioritize, and so it might be 3, it might be 4, but we don't just throw everything at the wall. They have a thorough, I think we had 3 meetings last year to go through everything before they decided what they wanted to ask for and to prioritize it, because
And that's what you're submitting to the mayor's office?
that is to the mayor's office, correct?
Because I know we, as a council, have worked over the past several years, going back into last term, of getting departments to ask for everything. You may not get it, but we don't know what your needs are if you don't ask for it. So if you're just saying, we're going to ask for these 3 things, but you really need 6.
Sure, and I don't think understood. I guess we will ask for everything That
That's not like the I mean, I appreciate that and understand that, but I also understand sometimes if you ask for 6 things and you really want number 1, you don't want to give the impression that number 6 is important as number 1.
I think you can still do your priority, like this is our priority, but we really need these 6 things, and then, rank them 1 through 6. But I would hate for you to internally cut yourself off where maybe something could be done and you could have gotten that 4th thing, but you didn't ask for it.
That's fair. And again, I think that we have very thorough and lengthy discussions and votes and prioritizing in the sense that if only one judge wants it, it's probably not going to get asked for. So
Gotcha.
I think that it's collaborative in that sense of narrowing down. So,
Okay.
so that we're making sure that the body as a whole, or at least the majority, wants it.
I just want to make sure you're letting us know what you need and not deciding internally, oh, we don't think we're going to get this. Like, give us the opportunity to consider it.
We just want to make sure when we do make our ask, we telegraph that as a body, the decision has been made that these are the priorities in this order, based upon a vote, based upon a discussion about where the biggest needs are, based upon the cost associated with it. If you have something that's working okay, but not great versus nothing at all, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
And to Councilmember Toombs's point, I think one of the things that we've seen in some departments is we won't hear about all of the needs. And in the end, it kind of festers, and then we end up with like a huge issue that we should have addressed years ago, but we didn't know about it. And so I totally agree with what she's saying. And I think that it's kind of probably more prevalent in some metro departments that have a lot of layers, where there are issues that are like directly impacting probably more district level council people than maybe at large, where there will end up being a lot of support because we can relate, or we see the outcome of that issue not being funded or whatever. So I'll echo her sentiment. Any questions from any of our other council members present? So I guess I'm trying to think about, and this is kind of more a general question for probably anybody that wants to answer, not necessarily you, Chancellor, but how will we learn other than your budget requests? Like, I'm thinking through all these discussion items, and I have a ton of notes, but like your weighted case study in the spring, like how will we learn about outcomes and capacity and kind of the alignment of vision across all the different stakeholders in relation to kind of some of the OFS recommendations and next steps, like Councilmember Wiener mentioned to, previous speaker about coming back to committee to Judge Todd. And that's totally something that's doable as I think about the rest of the time that I'm chair. But what are other ways that we learn about your outcomes of all this work that you're doing?
So in terms of the weighted caseload, that is something that the comptroller's office controls, and they do a time study every 10 years, and certain kinds of cases are attributed certain amount of weight that's a function of time, and judges across the state are supposed to keep track of their case time versus their non-case time that is still judicial time, and there's a complicated calculus, and there are certain things that are going to be given enhancement factors, none of which has been figured out at this time, and it's sort of a combination of a committee of judges and the administrative office of the courts and the comptroller's office. And all of that, I believe, is probably supposed to be done, I would assume, in the second quarter of next year. The state's on the July to June fiscal like Metro. So, supposedly we're going to be doing this time study in March or April, but we don't really know. Then there's going to be a whole lot of data to compile. That's probably terribly wishful thinking to think it's going to happen by June 30 next year. But that process is really going to be controlled by the state. In terms of the proposals about cases going from one set of courts to another, this is a pretty new conversation. And as you can see, we have not really discussed it among us because it's just come up and we've all sort of been sorting through how that could impact us. I'm not exactly sure how to move that forward.
Okay.
Probably Bart and I need to talk to Kyle and Judge Walker and figure that out and maybe include some of the other stakeholders who have brought those proposals to this committee to understand why they think that's going to be better and to discuss it. If there were some, and that is a huge change, it would be if all those cases moved or some component of those cases, they would have very significant budget and impacts.
And I totally appreciate what you're saying. I think I have faith we can do big, impactful systems change. And maybe that's naive, but I'm still here, and have, 3 years left, at my level. So I guess I'm thinking about that, and I don't know what the answer is here, but I think that's something that we should be figuring out, and I don't know what that looks like. And so, I'm open to input. But this is something that, I don't want our committee to drop. I want us to continue to have whatever that conversation looks like within our committee, to ask those questions of the stakeholders, to socialize kind of these wish lists and kind of the vision for improving, some of the timelines related to disposition. And so I know that you'll be a great leader in that space and kind of partner on it. And so I appreciate you being here to speak to it. I know I've kept everybody way over time, but any other questions for Chancellor or Mr. Pickett before they finish? Okay, I appreciate that. I want to give an opportunity for Sharon Roberson from the Y to come up and speak if you'd like, since you're here, and I know you're such a huge partner in domestic violence cases and everybody that you're serving. And so I guess if there's any issues, well, I know there's issues, but challenges that you need some help solving
Well,
from us.
thank you very much, and I won't take too much of your time. As you know, at the Weaver Domestic Violence Center, we provide more domestic violence services than anyone in the state of Tennessee. And several people today have talked about partnerships that they have with the YW. One thing I will say is that we do need additional funding. It's simply that. These programs we've done with the present funding we have, we get $275,000 from Metro on a $3 million budget that it takes to run the Weaver Center. We have to come up with the rest of the money ourselves. And that has stayed at that point for at least the last 7 years. So we have not had an increase, and domestic violence is spiking. We kept the Weaver Center open all during COVID, and we did that with staffing issues, with individuals we never closed, because we want to make this city as safe as possible for the people that live here. And we do need additional funding. Any questions for me?
How much?
Oh.
I mean, since we're talking about money with everybody else, we might as well.
We would actually, we had looked, we were trying to be, aware of that others had also needs in the cities, but we really needed to double the budget that we were requesting from Metro.
Okay, we will make a note of that. Thank you very much for sharing about that. Any other committee questions for any of our speakers before we wrap up? I feel like, as far as, and I thank you so much for being here and hanging with us through this whole thing. I feel like from a next step perspective, I don't have a concrete vision about next steps. I feel like there's going to be a lot of discussion kind of related to all the stakeholders and kind of this process kind of around the budget. I don't want to wait, though, until we hear from the mayor and the mayor's budget, and then we are reacting, as part of the chair and vice chair Toombs's substitute. And so I will figure out kind of what that looks like, because I think we're going to need more information on all of these things well in advance of those discussions, because you think about I would say, competing priorities that are happening, of course. It's a busy week for people, and there's a lot of people that didn't hear this information. So it's kind of like this is the beginning of the conversation, and it's not the end. And ultimately, I feel like I don't have a good sense of really the objective of how are we going to speed up the disposition process to get to the point where we're kind of in a better position. And so I feel like there's more discussion that needs to happen kind of related to some of those concrete recommendations and how we can navigate those as a city. And so that's something that I'm thinking about. So just wanted to kind of socialize all the things that are still on my mind. I know I'm going to have some of the questions or things that I wrote down. There's probably questions that I will come up with later on, and I will follow up and potentially we'll figure out how to collect those and send them over. But I got some information to process, I think, after hearing from everyone. And so I greatly appreciate everybody's time. It is very valuable, and I appreciate your commitment and service to the city. So thank you so much. And with no other questions, we're adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.